If you use letting agents to find tenants and to manage your property, well, it's likely that this is going to be your biggest cost as a landlord, apart from your buy-to-let mortgage if you have one. But what can you do to make sure that you're getting value for money? That they'll actually look after your tenants and your property. So, in today's video, I'm talking about how to choose and use letting agents. And I'll explain what they actually do, how they charge, what to look out for in those pesky contracts, and how you can avoid some of the common pitfalls. And this will help landlords choose letting agents and know what they should be looking for. And if you're a letting agent watching, it's good for you to hear about it from the perspective of a landlord. We are your customers after all. And if you stick around to the end, I'll explain how to check whether the agents are going to be ready and actually understand the upcoming Renters' Rights Act. So who am I? I'm Suzanne Smith, lawyer turned landlord, and I run the independentlandlord.com website and this YouTube channel, bringing landlords, letting agents, and other property businesses reliable, practical, independent information without all the politics and the clickbait nonsense. Right, let's get started. We're going to kick off with why landlords need to be very careful when choosing a letting agent. Well, first of all, letting agents are our representatives. They're our face to the world, dealing with applicants and tenants and the trades on our behalf. And if they do something, they bind us, even if we haven't given them express authority for it, because under agency law in England, if it's the sort of thing that an agent would ordinarily do, then the other people are allowed to rely on it. So it's really important that we have good agents. Also, it's shockingly easy for anyone to set up as a letting agent. Unlike solicitors, surveyors, chartered accountants, there's no requirement to have a professional qualification or license. This means that rogue or completely fake letting agents can appear, set up a website, and start taking money from unsuspecting landlords and tenants. And only last week, there was a case of a letting agent setting up a cannabis farm in landlords' properties. And there's also well-meaning but not very good agents who haven't taken the basic level 3 qualification for letting agents, and that's the one that's equivalent to an A level. We want to make sure that they provide a good service for our customers, which are our tenants. We want our tenants to stay happy. And a big part of this is getting repairs done quickly and efficiently and getting to the bottom of problems when they happen. It might not always be simple. For instance, damp and mold. Is it really condensation? Or is it water penetration? Or is there something else that needs fixing? And a big bugbear, are they actually doing regular inspections? Many agents only do it once a year, and then that's more honoured in the breach. But letting agents are our eyes and ears. And as landlords, we stay liable if agents break the law on our behalf. So it's not enough that you can assume that you can hand over your keys and forget about it and watch the money roll in. It doesn't work like that. It's not passive income. So let's get on to what letting agents actually do. Well, typically there are 3 different service levels that letting agents provide. And the first one is, and not all of them provide this, is let only, or sometimes called tenant find. And so it does what it says on the tin. They go and find tenants for landlords and then hand over the relationship and the property management to the landlord after they've found and signed up the tenants. So if a tenant finds, the agent will do the property advertising, putting it on Rightmove or Zoopla or on the market. They'll arrange the viewings. They'll come up with a shortlist, conduct referencing and right to rent checks. Usually they'll charge extra for referencing. They'll also take a holding deposit, prepare and get signed the tenancy agreement. They'll register the tenancy deposit for you and provide the prescribed information within the time limit, or sometimes they might let you do it and give the details to you. And sometimes they carry out the check-in. And letting agents may use third parties to do things on your behalf, such as inventories or getting the up to date gas safety certificate or an EPC. They'll charge you for that. So the cost varies for let only and is often a percentage of the annual rent or a fixed sum. So if it's a percentage, it might be 10%, it might be a month's rent, or a 3 weeks rent, 5 weeks rent, and then all the extras on top. But do have a look out for the extras because some agents include everything in their headline percentage fee, whereas others have a low headline fee and then charge for everything else on top of it, and maybe even a compliance fee, which is what they're supposed to be doing anyway. One thing to look out for is many agents charge a renewal fee if the tenant stays beyond the initial fixed term, and they might charge to arrange another fixed term, which will soon be going away when the Renters' Rights Bill comes into force. And some even charge a renewal fee when the fixed term expires and becomes periodic, even though nothing happens. And it'll be very interesting to see what letting agents do once the Renters' Rights Act comes into force and it abolishes fixed terms and renewals go the way of the dodo. Some letting agents don't actually offer let only as a one-off fee. Instead, they offer what they call rent collection or rent management. For a genuine let only, it's a one-off fee and there's nothing that's ongoing. You can go back to them and ask them to renegotiate the rent, but you don't have to. You can do it yourself. But with rent collection and rent management, there's an ongoing relationship. So they'll do everything that we've just spoken about in let only, but on top of that, they'll collect the monthly rent and provide rent schedules. And so this is often a little bit more expensive than a let only. But unlike a let only, it's an annual amount. You pay it all of the time for as long as the tenants are in the property. And some of them actually will stop you from terminating it. And what they actually do with rent collection, rent management, is they will receive the monthly rent from the tenants, provide a rent schedule for the landlord. They'll take their fee and then they'll send the balance onto the landlord. Now, they'll usually chase initial arrears, and that might also include reminders and that sort of thing. Although actual large arrears and court proceedings will be referred to solicitors, they're unlikely to do it themselves within that fee. Yeah, and I personally think there's money for old rope because you can use property technology software to do a lot of this for you next to nothing. Or what I do is I just happen to have all my tenants who pay the rent at the same day of the month. And I check it mid-morning to see have they all paid. And invariably they have, but sometimes they might not have paid. And I'll just send them a little text saying, oh, it's rent day today. But I've never actually had any rent arrears. People have always paid by the end of the day. And so for me, it's not actually that difficult. And I would rather follow up with the tenants themselves if they're late with paying rather than getting somebody else to do it. But do be very careful with rent collection, as many of the big reputable agents try to tie in landlords and say you can't terminate. The next one is full property management, and this includes tenant find and rent collection services, and also they'll handle the repairs and the maintenance. They'll liaise with contractors and handle the day-to-day tenant inquiries, make sure all of the gas safety certificates, etc., are renewed, and they'll also typically perform inspections, often once or twice a year, and they'll keep track of all of the compliance things. Some agents charge separate compliance or admin fees for this on top of the actual property management fee. They'll also handle rent increases or renewal documentation for as long as it lasts. It usually costs about 10 to 20% of the gross rent each month, although it can be higher in some parts of the country. But do check what's included and what's excluded. Because like an all-inclusive package holiday, you need to read the small print to make sure what you want to eat is actually included and not payable at a huge supplement. And we should expect to pay a reasonable and fair amount for a good service. It's only fair. And often the bargain basement amount won't give you a good service because they're not going to make money and not going to be able to attract staff on good salaries, good quality staff who will look after you. So don't penny pinch on it. But also, there are agents who charge a very high fee for a poor or mediocre service. I was speaking to a landlord this week who's paying 20%, and it's in London, so that's a lot of money. And they've done 4 inspections in 8 years, and they've just been a bit rubbish. So, and they're a property market, and they're a reputable agent on paper, but it's all about the individuals, because you might have a really good brand name and a really good letting agent, but the people who are actually managing your property, that's what's important, because you've got to make sure that they're good and they know what they're doing and they're qualified. So this brings me on to the next topic: how to vet letting agents. Now, landlords often rely on word of mouth, but that's not enough. When I first started out as an accidental landlord, I just went for the letting agent that had the most amount of boards in the area. I didn't have a clue. I didn't know what to ask. I mean, as it happened, they did a pretty good job and it was fine on a let only basis. I've always self-managed. But I think that was more luck than design, because often the letting agents that have a lot of boards around aren't necessarily the best one. What you're looking for with letting agents is an agency that's going to do what they say they're going to do. They're organized, they're professional, they're nice to deal with, and they give a good impression of you as a landlord. And so one of the ways to check this is to do a mystery shop. Call them up and pretend that you're a prospective tenant, that you've seen an advert, and see what they're like to you on the phone. Are they nice? Do they take lots of information? Or are they a bit rude? It will take ages to answer the phone. Yeah, how do they communicate, and how knowledgeable are they about their listing? Ask some questions about the property and see how they respond. You can also look at online reviews, but be careful because they can be manipulated. I would always look for ALA Property Mark membership, because it means that at least somebody in the company, high up in the company, a principal, will have a recognized qualification, one of the ALA qualifications, and they will have to follow the Property Mark rules and the Property Mark Code of Conduct, which is actually from the Property Ombudsman. But bear in mind that even if it is a property mark agent, that the individual people who work in the business might not be qualified. And so you should ask whether the people that you're dealing with are actually qualified. What kind of training have they had? And with all the laws changing, I don't think that you can just rely on experience. What you're looking for is somebody who has been trained, who understands the rule, and who has experience. And the two of them combined mean that when problems come up in the future, they're more likely to do the right thing. Often the smaller agents give better service because they have a lower turnover of staff, and you've got somebody who owns the business, who's working on it, and they care more. But there is always a risk for going for small letting agents. So here are a couple of tips. First of all, have a look at their website. Does it seem legit? They must have something that's called a client money protection logo on their website. And if you click through to that, you'll see whether or not their registration is up to date. Check to see if they're actually with a redress scheme. And is it easy to find their full fees? Because sometimes you really have to search around, and it's a legal requirement for letting agents to put their fees on their website. And I give bonus marks to letting agents who actually explain their terms and conditions on their website. Most letting agents don't, and then and they don't even send it to the landlords to check before they send the electronic document for signing, when it's normally in a hurry. Another good thing to look at is whether they have their team on their website, and you can cross-check it with LinkedIn to see if these people have been there a long time or whether they have high turnover. And if they've got high turnover of staff, it's not a good sign, because it means people aren't happy and they're moving on. So it means that you won't have continuity and you'll be forever getting new property managers. And if you're at all worried, you can check them out on the Companies House website and see whether they consistently file accounts late. And you can just see who's involved and see whether it looks like a legitimate company. Because unfortunately, there are scam letting agents out there that pretend to be letting agents and they're not. They're just ripping people off. So once you think that you've found the right letting agent, you really need to spend time at looking at the agency contract and don't assume that they're all standard form and they're all fair and reasonable because they're not. I mean, a lot of landlords don't even look at the agreements and they come through on the DocuSign and they just sign them without reading it. And they might not be given them in advance. Ask to be sent the terms of business right up front so you can go through it. And these are some of the things that you can look out for when you read it. The number one thing is whether they have termination fees or a lock-in, because some agents, rather than leaning into feedback of mediocre service or understanding that sometimes landlords have different priorities in life and things change and they might want to take their properties back, but letting agents often try to lock in landlords and stop them from leaving or ask them to pay a huge exit fee. And so if a contract has this, it's not a good sign because it shows their approach to customers. It's not one of trying to engage when there's problems, but it's one of trying to shackle in landlords. But you can try and negotiate a fair notice period. And if they won't budge, walk away. There are hundreds of letting agents out there. Agents should try and understand their customers and figure out why they're not happy and not make the landlord have to take legal advice or go to the redress scheme just because they want to go somewhere else. The next thing is renewal fees, and I mentioned this earlier, but watch out for ongoing charges beyond the initial term. And it might be over and above the initial amount that you paid for as a let-only landlord, or even extra amounts when you're already paying for full management, and then you get an extra bit each year. So watch out for that. Some agents insist on a long sole agency period, and so this is a lock-in period at the beginning. And if it's a long time, you might be stuck paying a commission, even if you find tenants yourself, or you've given up with them and go to another agent. So make sure that that lock-in period either isn't there or it's very short. And one big thing to look out for is commission on the sale of the property. And I had this in one of my letting agent agreements, the one when I was an accidental landlord. It said I had to pay the agent 1.5% commission if I sold the property to the tenant, even though they wouldn't have had anything to do with that and they've already been paid a fair amount as part of the let-only fee. So I think that this is unenforceable if you're a consumer landlord, and I'll get to that in a minute. Another big no-no is a clause that says that they can change the fees whenever they like. It's called a unilateral fee increase. And if there's no right for you to terminate, it's also potentially unenforceable, but it's best avoided from the outset. And you don't want to be doing with business with somebody who can put up the charges whenever they like and then not let you leave. Another thing to look out for is the markup on repairs. And many agents will add 10 to 15% on top of contractor invoices. Now, if they're actually managing a big refurbishment, then that might be fair enough. But often they're just acting as a glorified call center to arrange a new boiler or to get something fixed. So is this something that's fair? Should they be getting an extra amount? And then often the contractor will be giving them a kickback as well. So make sure that you have the right not to use their contractor, or just to agree to pay extra if they do inspections, if they're actually involved there. Because often the agents won't even go and check what the work has been done. And I know whenever I've had contractors in, you always need to check what they're doing, because contractors will always take the easy route. If it's easy to put a light switch here, but you want it there, they'll put it there unless you tell them to put it there. And so if you are paying 10 to 15%, then make sure that the letting agents are actually doing something for the money to protect your interest. And there's one thing I really want to get across to everybody, and I say this as a solicitor and a landlord, if you're unhappy with any part of the agent's contract, negotiate before signing. Don't be embarrassed, and don't assume it's standard. If the agent won't budge on unreasonable terms and conditions and charges, then walk away, because it does not augur well, because it shows how they treat their customers and how they'll treat you along the line. And fair-minded agents know that their best chance of retaining landlords is by providing a good service and not by trapping them into unfair contracts. And remember, the agent works for you, and you can and should shop around. Next question: do landlords have protection from unfair terms in agency contracts? Well, yes, if you're considered a consumer landlord, because the Consumer Rights Act states that an unfair term isn't binding on consumers if it causes a significant imbalance in their rights and obligations. And to benefit from this consumer protection, you must own the property in your own name. So if you own it through a limited company, you're not a consumer. And you must have another job, not be a full-time landlord. And this doesn't necessarily hinge on the number of properties that you have. So if you're a full-time accountant and you have 20 properties as well, you're not a full-time landlord. So it means you can still be considered a consumer, even though you've got a lot of properties. But you shouldn't have to rely on consumer protection law. Actively choose letting agents who have fair terms. I'm now going to go through some of the common problems that landlords have with agents and how to handle them. A biggie, particularly with the Renters' Rights Bill coming up. Poor tenant selection. It must be the most important job that letting agents do, that landlords do as well. For instance, they might not screen tenants thoroughly. They might let somebody in with a patchy rental history or not enough income. So tell them up front that you want to see credit references for the tenants they choose. And if they try to fob you off with data protection or GDPR, then tell them that you're registered with the ICO and that you have a data protection policy. They act on your behalf, and you have a right to see this. And if you're not registered with the ICO and you don't have a data protection policy, check out this blog post here, and you'll be able to find out exactly how to go about it. And obviously, don't say you have these things if you don't. Get everything lined up and tell them at the start that this is what you want to be involved in. You want to be involved in the tenant selection and to see the referencing yourself, so you can make a decision in full knowledge of the facts. The next one is not responding quickly to repairs and getting them done properly. And this is something that can escalate really quickly, and it will upset the tenants if they report things and they don't get fixed, or they don't get fixed properly. And sometimes they don't get to the bottom of the problem because it's just a to-do list. So it is really important that you understand how they do property management and how they check up on reported repairs. You can ask to see their stats to see how quickly that they respond to repairs and how quickly they get things done. And we're all going to have to respond quickly to serious issues when AWAB's law is coming in with the Renters' Rights Bill. And if you've done my renters' rights training, you'll know what I mean by that. Another big bone of contention is infrequent inspections. It's really important for the agent to check the property regularly for maintenance issues and to make sure that the tenants are looking after it properly. At least twice a year, sometimes more depending on the tenants, and certainly for HMOs. Once a year is not enough. It is not a prime service if they're only doing one inspection a year, regardless if they call it prime. And a lot can happen in a year. And I also recommend that you go on an inspection yourself at least once a year with the agent, so you can see for yourself the condition of the property and figure out what work you're going to be having to do in the future, because there will be something. Things always go wrong on properties. And if you're not hearing about them going wrong, then it doesn't mean that they're not going wrong. It just means that you're not being told about it. And you want to see whether the tenants are happy as well, because you don't want voids. You want good tenants who are going to stay a long time and look after the property. And when you go around yourself, then you can have a look and see how your tenants are being looked after. Another problem is poor organisation. Landlords have to comply with so many laws, and the buck does stop with us on lots of things if an agent makes a mistake and forgets something. And so ask what systems they have in place to make sure nothing is missed. There are lots of fantastic software services out there for letting agents like Good Lord, etc. And if the agent misses a compliance deadline, you might receive a financial penalty from the council, or even have a rent repayment order slapped on you. You might be able to claim breach of contract against the agent, but that's little comfort for you once a penalty lands. And as a practical tip, make sure that they provide you, as a matter of course, details of all of the safety checks that they do, copies of the gas safety certificates, proof that the prescribed information for the deposit has been served. Insist that they send you all of these documents as a matter of course, because if they go out of business, or if they disappear, or if they just get difficult and you need these documents to prove what you've done, then it's going to be no good if they refuse to give them to you. So make sure that you start as you mean to go on, and you just get all of these documents as a matter of course, and then put them into a folder, an electronic folder. And with letting agents, as with everything in life, prevention is better than cure. So be clear about your expectations at the start. And if you don't like the feeling you get with a letting agent, then walk away. There are plenty of other ones. And make sure you have regular meetings with them, and don't just rely on them telling you what to do. Put a note in the calendar that you can have a Zoom meeting, or go and see them in person once a year to go through everything. And then make sure they give you property inspection reports with photos, and you understand what's being followed up on. Because being a landlord is not passive income. And even if you use an agent, you need to be educated yourself. You can't just rely on them. So now the promised bonus: how to check if the agents are ready for the Renters' Rights Bill. Wow, there's a lot of detail in the Renters' Rights Bill, and it's going to change so much about what we do at the moment. So here are a few ideas of how you can just kind of question them about just how much they know about the Renters' Rights Bill. Ask them what kind of training their staff have had. Have they had like proper property mark training, or have they just been looking at things online? Well, and if they've done my training on the Independent Landlord channel, then all well and good. But if they're just reading things online, that doesn't sound very good, because they do need to have proper formal training on it. You could give them a little test. Ask them to explain the new rules on rent in advance, and how they'll handle rent increases when the Act comes into force. And watch this video to see if they're right. You could ask them, how will they survey the market for the market rent each time they increase the rent? And just see if they know what you're talking about when you mention these things. And finally, ask them how they're going to manage the transition. They should be thinking about it already, how they're going to educate the tenants, and particularly those that are on a fixed term tenancy at the moment. What are they intending to do about it? Have they even thought about it? Do they have plans in place? It might be coming into force by the end of the year. You would hope that they were thinking about something already. And to keep up to date with everything that's going on, you can sign up for my free weekly newsletter here. And I put out a lot of content on YouTube, which you can see in these two playlists. Firstly, my how-tos, and then the landlord updates. And please give this a thumbs up if you found it useful. See you soon.